Mark Jensen wasn't the kind of man who left things to chance. A former fire chief turned high school shop teacher, he believed in preparation, double-checking gear, and carrying backups for his backups. His 15-year-old son, Luke, had inherited that same quiet intensity, smart, reserved, and drawn more to rivers and pine trees than TikTok or football games. The two were close in the way that only comes from shared silence and matching footsteps through forest trails. On July 14, 2014, Mark and Luke packed their gear into a weathered silver Tacoma and headed northeast from their home in Anchorage. Their destination, Wrangell St. Elias National Park, a staggering 13 million acres of unforgiving wilderness, glacial valleys, and ancient, unmarked trails. Their plan was simple, a weekend fishing trip, no cell service, no crowds, just 2 days of casting lines, cooking over an open fire, and sleeping under the stars. Mark had done this route once before, years ago, and out and back near Tebay Lakes. He told Rachel, his wife, that they'd be back by Sunday night. "If we're not, it means the fish were biting," he joked. He packed bear spray, extra rations, a compass, waterproof matches, a detailed topographic map, and a PLB, personal locator beacon, though he told Rachel it was just a formality. Luke was excited, not in the loud way most teenagers are, but in the way he quietly triple-checked his fishing tackle and brought his favorite thermos for hot cocoa. He had even packed a journal, something he hadn't touched in months. It was just the two of them. No distractions, no deadlines. Mark's last text to Rachel was sent from a gas station in Kaitina. It read, "No bars ahead. Love you. See you Sunday." She sent back a heart. It never marked as delivered. Somewhere along that dirt road beyond the last cell tower and into the land where GPS gets glitchy and maps become more suggestion than fact, Mark and Luke disappeared into the wild. And for 10 years, they stayed gone. No calls, no clues, no bodies. Just the truck, parked neatly at the trailhead. And a mystery no one could explain. It was a warm morning for Alaska, blue skies, high 60s, and the kind of soft breeze that carried birdsong through the birch trees. Mark's sister, Erin, had stopped by the Jensen house just before they left. She hugged Luke tightly, called him City Boy, and made him promise to catch something bigger than his dad. "Make sure he lets you drive," she whispered with a wink. Mark rolled his eyes and handed her the house keys. "Feed the cat. Try not to kill the plants." The goodbye was casual, normal, the kind you only realize was final when it's already too late. The neighbors saw them pull out. Mark at the wheel, Luke beside him, arms out the window, the aluminum frame of a folded-up fishing net sticking from the truck bed like a flag. It was just another summer weekend. They weren't the kind of family that drew attention, quiet, polite, solid. Mark mowed his lawn every Thursday. Luke shoveled his elderly neighbor's walkway every winter without being asked. Later, that would make it harder, the suddenness of it, the complete lack of warning. At 10:42 a.m., Luke posted a photo to Instagram. It was a wide shot of the trailhead sign surrounded by dense spruce and wildflowers in full bloom. The caption read, "Off-grid. Catch you later." It would be the last thing he ever posted. The photo got 41 likes. Among the comments were emojis, inside jokes, and a string of fire emojis from a girl named Sarah who used to sit next to him in biology. No one knew they were looking at the final digital imprint of a life about to vanish. Rachel checked the post around noon. She smiled, sent a "be safe" text, and went about her day. That night she poured a glass of wine and fell asleep reading a book with her phone face up beside her, just in case. The weekend passed like any other, until Sunday night came and went. No truck in the driveway, no text, no knock on the door. By Monday morning, Rachel was calling Mark's phone every 10 minutes. By noon, she'd filed a missing persons report. That photo of the trailhead would become a symbol, printed on flyers, shown on the news, pinned on bulletin boards across the state. A cheerful, unassuming snapshot of the moment everything changed. By Monday morning, the Jensen household was too quiet. Rachel had left the porch light on the night before, assuming they'd pulled in late. But the driveway stayed empty. No tire crunch on gravel, no slam of the truck door, just silence. She told herself they'd taken an extra day, maybe caught more fish, maybe camped another night. But by noon, the knot in her chest had tightened. Mark always called, always. Even in places without service, he'd find a ranger station, use a landline, leave a note at a trail register. It wasn't just routine, it was who he was. Responsible, predictable, safe. She called Aaron, then she called state troopers. By mid-afternoon, a single patrol car rolled up the gravel road leading to T-Bay Trailhead, 40 miles from the nearest cell tower. The officer found the silver Tacoma parked in a shaded turnoff. Dust covered the windshield. A folded flannel hung over the driver's seat, fishing rods still tied down in the bed. The doors were locked. The keys were inside. Nothing looked out of place, except that no one was there. No signs of struggle, no broken branches, no gear missing, just stillness. The trail registry box stood nearby. Luke hadn't signed it. Neither had Mark. And that small detail would gnaw at investigators for years. The officer circled the area, calling out their names. No response. He opened the truck, checked for a note. There was none. Rachel arrived hours later, flanked by Aaron and 2 local deputies. She stared at the truck like it had betrayed her. That vehicle had always meant safety, road trips, grocery runs, cold mornings and hot coffee. Now it sat like an empty shell at the edge of a wilderness that had swallowed her husband and son without a sound. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and everyone felt it. The officers called in a chopper before the sun dipped below the ridge. As its blades cut through the sky and dust kicked up around the empty trailhead, the search for Mark and Luke Jensen had officially begun. Not as a rescue, but as a question no one wanted to answer. How could 2 people vanish so completely in a place they knew with no trace at all? The first 72 hours are everything. Every ranger knows that. Every SAR team drills for it. After that window closes, survival odds plummet, especially in a place like Wrangell St. Elias, where terrain is king and weather is the knife. On July 15th at dawn, the search began in earnest. 2 helicopters, 4 dog teams, and nearly 30 volunteers hit the backcountry. They swept through drainage basins, combed ridge lines, followed river bends. A base camp was established near the trailhead. Maps spread out on folding tables. Radios buzzed with coordinates and clipped voices. The air smelled like pine, diesel, and fear. At first, there was hope. Maybe Mark had twisted an ankle. Maybe Luke had gotten sick, and they were hunkered down waiting for help. The trail wasn't remote by Alaskan standards. Experienced hikers could loop the route in 2 days. But by midday, that hope began to thin. There were no boot prints, no broken branches, no sign of a camp, not even a fire ring or a dropped water bottle. The dogs caught no scent. The helicopters saw no movement. It was like the forest had hit backspace and deleted them. Rangers began to widen the perimeter. The weather held, but dark clouds loomed on the western edge of the sky. By nightfall, every person in that search knew they weren't just looking for hikers anymore. They were looking for ghosts. Rachel stayed at base camp. She refused to leave. She kept hoping for a call, a shout, a distant glimpse of flannel through the trees. But the radios stayed quiet. Every person returned at night, except the 2 who had walked in first. The local news ran a segment that evening. Father and son missing in Wrangell Wilderness. They showed a photo of Mark teaching Luke how to fly fish, both grinning at the camera, unaware they were already part of a story that would haunt Alaska for a decade. In the trees beyond the trailhead, the wind picked up. The forest made no noise but its own. And whatever had happened out there, whatever had taken 2 lives and left nothing behind, it left no tracks to follow, only questions that got heavier with every passing hour. The Wrangell St. Elias Wilderness is not forgiving. It doesn't care about GPS signals, printed maps, or the good intentions of men who plan ahead. It's the size of Switzerland, but with no highways, no cell towers, and fewer marked trails than a city park. The land shifts underfoot. Soft tundra one moment, loose scree the next. Glacial runoff carves sudden ravines. Old mining roads vanish into overgrowth or dead end at sheer rock faces. It's not a place you visit. It's a place that decides whether or not to let you out. That weekend, the weather turned. Fast. Search logs noted the shift around noon on Saturday. A cold front rolled down from the mountains, colliding with warm air from the Gulf of Alaska. The result was violent. Sleet, wind gusts over 40 miles per hour, and a dense fog that swallowed landmarks whole. Visibility dropped to just a few feet. Helicopter teams were grounded. Dogs couldn't track through the frozen mud. Even the most experienced rangers began marking trees to avoid doubling back on their own tracks. A storm like that in the Alaskan backcountry doesn't just complicate a search, it resets the clock. Tracks are washed away, scents vanish. Landmarks blur into white and gray until even the most seasoned hiker could be standing 10 feet from safety and never know it. If Mark and Luke were still moving that day, they were doing so blind. And if they had stopped, their shelter, if they had one, was now buried under snow and branches, invisible even from the air. The terrain that had once promised father-son bonding now offered only misdirection and silence. Every searcher knew the terrain was working against them. It wasn't just remote, it was strategic in its indifference. One wrong step could mean a sprained ankle, a lost compass, a decision made too late. And out there, you don't get many chances to be wrong. As the storm raged on and search teams pulled back for safety, the fear became something unspoken, the kind of fear that doesn't come from what you find, but from what you don't. The wilderness wasn't just the backdrop, it was the antagonist, and it was winning. Rachel Jensen didn't cry at first, not when the truck was found, not when the officers handed her Mark's keys in a plastic evidence bag, not even when the ranger leaned in, voice low, and said the words she would never forget. "We're treating this as a critical missing person case." She nodded robotically, made coffee no one drank, kept the porch light on, but by day 3 something cracked. She collapsed in the hallway, still wearing Mark's old hoodie, her phone clutched in her hand, like a lifeline that would never ring. Aaron held her. She didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. News crews arrived that afternoon. A reporter from Anchorage Daily News interviewed Rachel in the driveway. The footage never aired. Her grief was too raw, her words too fragmented. She spoke in present tense. Luke is 15. He loves trout fishing behind her. The house stood still. Like it, too, was waiting. Online speculation was already boiling. Comments on Facebook and Reddit spun every theory imaginable. Maybe they got lost. Maybe they were attacked by wildlife. What if Mark did something to the boy? That last one spread fast. Whispers from people who didn't know him, who'd never seen the way Mark laced his son's boots or slipped extra marshmallows into his hot chocolate when he thought no one was looking. The local sheriff's office received anonymous tips suggesting domestic issues and possible intent to disappear. A blogger picked up the story and labeled it "The Wrangell Vanishing." It trended for a day, lost in a sea of true crime fanatics, hungry for mystery, indifferent to pain. But to Rachel, none of it mattered. She didn't care about speculation. She only cared about the silence, the not knowing, the unbearable ache of imagining her son, cold, scared, or worse, all while the world casually debated his fate from behind keyboards and cable news desks. In the Jensen home, Luke's room remained untouched. His jacket still hung on the chair, his notebook still lay open on the desk. And Rachel sat in the doorway night after night, whispering things into the dark that no one could hear. The world had moved on, she hadn't. And until someone found them, she wouldn't. By the end of the first week, the search had become something else, not just a rescue effort, but a spectacle. What started as a local tragedy was now a national headline. "Father and son vanish in Alaska wilderness," read the CNN banner. Fox speculated on foul play. The Today Show ran a gentle segment, interviewing former park rangers about the dangers of the backcountry. Mark's face, smiling and sunburned beside Luke, holding up a silver trout, was suddenly everywhere. The photo was cropped and resized, used again and again across screens and newspapers, but every time Rachel saw it, it felt less like her family and more like an image being passed around, flattened by strangers. Sympathy came fast. So did the suspicion. Internet forums lit up with theories. One post, upvoted thousands of times, suggested Mark had faked his death. Another implied Luke had run away, and Mark had followed to protect him. Someone else pointed out the divorce Rachel had gone through 10 years earlier, weaving in conspiracies about custody battles that didn't exist. Strangers picked apart their lives like puzzle pieces that might fit a story more interesting than the truth. News crews arrived at the trailhead in SUVs, setting up tripods beside the search tents. Journalists wore neon safety vests and asked volunteers to cry on camera. A few did, most didn't. It wasn't that kind of grief, not the cinematic kind. It was quieter, tighter, more permanent. Rachel declined all interviews after the first one. She stopped answering her door. Her voicemail filled up. She unplugged the house phone. The attention didn't feel like help. It felt like intrusion. Somewhere, Mark and Luke were missing. Out there, real, cold, maybe hurt, maybe worse. But to the rest of the country, they were becoming something else entirely. Characters in a story with no ending. The narrative drifted further from reality every day. The media wanted closure, but the forest didn't give any. It just stood there, silent and massive, holding its secrets like it had for centuries. On the 14th day, the official search ended. It didn't happen with a press conference or a solemn announcement. Just a quiet call over the radio, "Stand down." Helicopters were rerouted, dogs were sent home, volunteers were thanked and dismissed. The tents at base camp were folded and packed away, the footprint of their efforts erased in a single afternoon. The search logs, once filled with red ink and frantic scribbles, were archived. Mark and Luke Jensen were now listed as missing, presumed deceased. But presumed wasn't enough for Rachel. She stood at the edge of the tree line as the last team pulled out, her arms wrapped around herself like the cold had just found her. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just whispered, "You didn't look long enough." The lead ranger didn't answer. What could he say? The terrain was too vast. The weather had turned. Resources were limited. They had searched smartly, they said, methodically. But none of that mattered when you were the one left behind. The wilderness had given them nothing, not a boot print, not a broken branch, not a single thread of clothing or drop of blood. It was like the earth had opened up and swallowed them whole. The official report concluded with a single line: "No further signs discovered. Recommendation: no additional search action unless new evidence emerges." Rachel read that line over and over. It was supposed to be the end. But to her, it was just a pause, a cruel comma. In Anchorage, the story slipped from the news cycle. National outlets moved on. There were newer tragedies, louder mysteries. The world kept spinning. But in the Jensen home, time stopped. Luke's shoes stayed by the door. His toothbrush remained in its holder. Every morning, Rachel made coffee for two. Every night, she left the porch light on. Because sometimes when the world refuses to find you answers, all you can do is hold space for the ones you lost. No bodies, no gear, no message scrawled on bark or stone. Just two names whispered in the dark by the woman who still believed they were out there, somewhere, still trying to come home. When a mystery goes unsolved, the world starts filling in the blanks. People need explanations, something to hold on to, even if it's not the truth. Within weeks of the search ending, theories began to circle, quietly at first, then louder. The simplest one was nature. A bear attack. Alaska's wilderness is home to thousands of them, grizzlies, black bears. Most keep their distance, but not all. A mother with cubs, a surprise encounter on a narrow trail. It could happen, but rangers found no signs, no blood, no torn clothing, no prints. Then came the hypothermia theory. The storm had hit hard that weekend. Sleet, freezing fog, 40-degree drops overnight. If they were caught out, even with supplies, it would have been brutal. Confusion, fatigue, the disorientation that comes right before the body shuts down. But again, no gear, no campfire, no bodies, and nothing washed downstream in the weeks that followed. Then came the darker ideas. What if Mark had snapped? What if he took Luke into the wild with no intention of returning? Some pointed to his quiet nature, his reserved personality. You never really know someone, they said, as if stillness were suspicious. Others whispered that maybe it wasn't planned, that something happened out there, an accident, a fall. And Mark had panicked. Maybe he couldn't save Luke, maybe he couldn't live with it. The theories piled up, some outlandish, some cruel. They're in Canada. It was a custody dispute. They joined a survivalist commune. People passed these rumors like campfire stories, each one more disconnected from reality than the last. And through it all, Rachel said nothing. She didn't defend Mark. She didn't explain Luke. She just waited. The speculation hurt, but it couldn't touch the one thing she knew with certainty. Her husband loved their son. And whatever happened in those woods, whatever ended that trip before it could become a memory, it wasn't a story written in malice. It was a story written in fear, in wilderness, in 1,000 small decisions made in a place where even one mistake could mean the end. But Rachel didn't believe it was the end, not yet. Not while there were still miles left unexplored, not while their names were still being spoken. On September 2, 2014, 51 days after Mark and Luke vanished, the Alaska State Troopers filed the case under a new category, presumed fatality, bodies unrecovered. It was a line buried in a report, one Rachel had to ask for. It arrived in a manila envelope, hand-delivered by a deputy who couldn't meet her eyes. She read it in silence, then folded it in half and placed it in a drawer she never opened again. The file said what the authorities couldn't bring themselves to say aloud. Mark and Luke were gone. But without bodies, there were no death certificates, no funeral, no place to leave flowers, just a quiet, clinical label for what no one could prove. Cold case. It sounded sterile, icy, like something that could be boxed and archived. But to Rachel, it wasn't cold. It burned. It haunted every room of her house, every street in town, every shadow in the woods. The school year started again. Luke's desk in homeroom sat empty. His name was called once, out of habit, then crossed off the list. Teachers avoided Rachel in the grocery store. Friends offered smiles that didn't reach their eyes. People didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. Erin visited daily. She kept the yard trimmed, cleaned out the fridge. But she couldn't clean the silence. The silence had roots now. It stretched deep, wrapped around everything. And yet, Rachel never gave up, not once. She started keeping a journal, recording dreams, theories, strange coincidences. She made calls to out-of-state search organizations. She spoke to survival experts, hired a private investigator who specialized in wilderness disappearances. He found nothing, but she kept going. Because even in the face of an official declaration, hope has a strange way of surviving. It doesn't listen to reports. It doesn't close cases. It lingers in the heartbeat between midnight and morning. It sharpens when everyone else forgets. When even memory begins to dim, hope stays clear. The world had closed the book. Rachel refused. She didn't need certainty to keep searching. She only needed love. And love, when rooted in loss, is a kind of faith that refuses to die. Over time, the search parties disappeared. So did the cameras. The story faded from headlines, replaced by newer tragedies, but the forest never stopped whispering. In the years that followed, sightings trickled in, just often enough to reopen the wound. A hunter in 2016 swore he saw two figures moving along the ridge near Nebezna Glacier. Said they matched the description: adult male, teen boy, both wearing dark jackets, one with a red pack. By the time rangers arrived, there were no tracks, no campsite, just wind and snow. In 2018, a pilot flying over Chitina Pass reported seeing something shiny in a river bend. Said it looked like a reflective survival blanket. The coordinates were noted. A team hiked in 3 days later. They found nothing, just rocks and runoff. Then there was the glove. In 2021, a hiker from Fairbanks came across a small, weathered glove near a dry creek bed. Blue nylon, youth size, half buried under pine needles. He didn't think much of it until he read a blog post about the Jensen case that night. The next day he returned, retrieved the glove, and mailed it to Alaska State Troopers. The lab results were inconclusive, too degraded, no usable DNA. But Rachel saw a photo. She stared at it for an hour. Luke had owned gloves like that. She remembered buying them before their trip to Denali, size medium, thermal lining, a tear at the wrist. The one in the photo had the same rip. She printed it and pinned it to the wall beside her desk. Not because it proved anything, but because it didn't disprove it either. And that was enough. People love to tell ghost stories about the woods, men who vanish. Tracks that lead nowhere, glimpses of movement through the trees. But to Rachel, the ghosts were real. They had names, faces, a laugh she could still hear in dreams. Mark and Luke weren't phantoms, they were family. And while the world kept turning, people kept hiking, and time kept piling on, she stayed rooted in that single truth. Until someone found them, they weren't gone, just lost. Somewhere deep inside, a silence too vast to measure. The room still smelled like him, like old flannel and pencil shavings and the mint-scented body spray he'd just started using. Luke's bed was still made, not neatly, but the way he always did it, lumpy on one side, one corner of the blanket tucked under, the other left messy. His shoes lined up under the window, his homework still clipped to the corkboard. Rachel hadn't touched any of it, not once. It had been 10 birthdays, 10 candles unlit, 10 years of writing happy birthday in a blank card she never sent. Every July she bought him something small, a book he would have liked, a pocket knife, a new pair of hiking socks. She wrapped each one carefully and stored them in a box at the top of her closet. The first year, people told her to grieve. The second year, they told her to heal. By the 5th, no one said anything at all. Luke had become a memory to everyone but her. She still heard his laugh in quiet moments, still expected to hear the door creak open, his muddy boots hitting the mat. Some days she swore she heard his voice call down the hallway. She'd freeze mid-step, heart pounding, only to realize it was the wind, or maybe something else. She kept his voicemail greeting saved on her phone, played it sometimes late at night, just to hear his voice say, "Hey, it's Luke. Leave a message." She'd left dozens, maybe more, not because she expected an answer, but because silence needed to be spoken into. Rachel knew people pitied her. She'd seen the looks, heard the whispers. It's not healthy. She should let go. It's been years. But they didn't understand. Letting go wasn't healing. It was erasure. It was pretending he had never existed beyond the obituary columns. And Rachel refused. Luke was still her son. Mark was still her husband. Their lives had mattered. Their absence still echoed. And until the day someone found them, until the silence finally gave up its secrets, she would keep waiting, lighting birthday candles for a boy who never got to grow up, whispering his name into the night, keeping the door to his room open, just in case he ever came home. By year 6, the story had hardened. No longer just a tragedy, It had become something darker, something twisted by time and distance. People didn't ask if Mark and Luke might still be alive. They asked what had really happened out there. Theories evolved like rumors do, slowly, then all at once. First came the whispers of a murder-suicide. A theory born not from evidence but from absence, of clues, of remains, of closure. Online sleuths dug into Mark's past, hunting for cracks. They found none, so they invented them. He lost his job, one Reddit post claimed. False. He had gambling debt. Another lie. He was quiet, introverted. You know the type, as if grief could be solved like a riddle, as if quiet made you dangerous. Then came the mental health speculation. What if he had snapped? A sudden break, a psychotic episode. Maybe he believed the world was ending, or that he had to protect Luke from something only he could see. It was all baseless. But that didn't stop the forums, the podcasts, the YouTube deep dives with pixelated photos and eerie music. Some people even called Rachel, leaving voicemails that started with condolences and ended with accusations. Strangers demanding she admit what really happened. She stopped answering the phone entirely. Truth had become optional. All that mattered now was the narrative. And narratives sell. Even the tabloids picked it up. "Father's final descent?" the headline read, beneath a doctored photo of Mark looking tired, his face subtly shadowed to suggest menace. But Rachel knew better. Mark had loved Luke with a kind of quiet, ferocious devotion. The idea that he could hurt him, that he could disappear by choice, didn't just feel wrong, it felt impossible. Still, the darkness spread. In the absence of evidence, people chose whatever version of the truth made them feel safest. It was easier to believe in monsters than in the randomness of nature, easier to explain away two vanished lives as madness than to admit the wilderness could take you without a trace, and keep you forever. It was a cardboard box no one had opened in nearly a decade. Mark's brother, Joel, found it while cleaning out a shared storage unit in Eagle River, the kind of place filled with old textbooks, faded photo albums, and gear that hadn't seen daylight in years. Mark's name was written on the side in black Sharpie. Inside were things Rachel couldn't bring herself to look at anymore: a spare tent, worn hiking boots, a coil of faded rope. And at the bottom, tucked between two notebooks, was a folded topographic map. It was stiff with age, the creases cracked and yellowed. Joel spread it out on the hood of his truck. It was a USGS topo of Wrangell St. Elias, the same region where Mark and Luke had vanished. But this one was different. Mark had made notes. Thin pencil marks traced possible routes, camping spots, old ranger stations. Some were labeled with question marks. One trail was crossed out entirely. Too steep. But near the southeast corner of the map, deep in an area with no official trail, just contour lines stacked tight like a warning, there was a red circle. No label, no date, just a ring of ink drawn with careful pressure. Joel stared at it. He didn't recognize the area. It wasn't on any brochure or park guide, just dense terrain, glacial runoff, sheer ridges, and what looked like a narrow ravine cutting through two peaks. He folded the map and drove straight to Rachel. She opened the door in silence, eyes landing on the old topo in his hands. She knew it instantly. It had once hung in Mark's garage, a project, a plan. "He never showed me this version," she said, tracing the red circle with her finger. Why would he mark that? No one could answer. But something about it felt intentional, like a breadcrumb left behind. Maybe not consciously, but purposefully. Joel contacted park officials. They checked the location. It had never been part of the original search grid. Too remote, too steep, too easy to miss. Rachel stared at the map for a long time. "That's where we start," she said. For the first time in years, her voice didn't waver. The forest had taken everything. But maybe, just maybe, it had left behind a clue. The internet never forgets. Not really. Stories fall out of view, fade from the homepage, slip into digital dust, but they're still there, buried beneath layers of headlines and hashtags, waiting for someone to dig them up. In early 2024, someone did. A wilderness podcaster named Jonah Wells, known for his series Lost Trails, stumbled across an old Reddit thread about the Jensens. He was researching cold cases in Alaska. The thread was 6 years old. Most of the links were broken, but the story hooked him instantly. A father and son vanish in broad daylight. No bodies, no gear, no closure. It read like fiction. It felt like a puzzle. Jonah didn't do true crime in the usual way. No gory details, no creepy sound effects. His episodes were slow, intimate, focused on human stories more than headlines. He reread the original news articles, tracked down public records, even contacted Joel Jensen, Mark's brother, who sent him a scan of the marked-up topo map. Jonah aired the episode on a Thursday. It was titled, "The Wrangell Disappearance Father, Son, Silence." It began with a quote from Mark's final text, "No bars ahead. Love you. See you Sunday." The download count surged overnight. By Saturday, the episode had over 500,000 streams. TikTok clips dissected the map. Twitter lit up with fresh theories. Journalists called Jonah. Then they called Rachel. She didn't answer at first, but she listened. Every word. She didn't cry. She didn't pace. She just sat at her kitchen table with her coffee going cold, hearing her husband and son's names spoken aloud, like they still mattered. Like the story wasn't over yet. When Jonah emailed her, carefully, respectfully, she didn't delete it. She didn't even hesitate. She just typed one line, "I'll talk." But I won't do this for clicks. She didn't want a spotlight. She wanted a searchlight. After 9 years of silence, Rachel was ready to speak. Not to defend, not to explain, but to be heard. They met at a trailhead cafe just outside Anchorage. Jonah brought only a notebook and a single mic. Rachel brought a box. Inside were newspaper clippings, a flash drive with voicemail recordings, and a printout of the topographic map. The same one Mark had marked all those years ago. Her voice was calm, clear. But beneath the surface was something else, not grief, not anger, but a sharpness, a clarity forged from years of unanswered questions. "Something never sat right with me," she began, "not just that they vanished, but how she talked about the trail registry left unsigned, about the weather that weekend, the fog, the sleet, about how Mark would have never ignored protocol, never left Luke exposed to the elements. He wasn't reckless. He was deliberate. Always, she described the glove found years later, the voicemail no one could trace, the red circle on the map. Everyone told me it was random, that the wilderness just took them. But Mark didn't wander into danger. He chose a path. He always had a plan. Jonah let her speak. No interruptions, no push for sound bites, just listening. When she finished, he asked only one question. "Do you think they're still out there?" Rachel looked away. Her eyes didn't fill, but her voice dipped just enough to make the silence afterward feel heavy. "I think something's still out there. Maybe not them, but something." The interview aired in full. No edits, no dramatic music. Just a woman telling the truth the world had stopped asking for. It struck a nerve. Within days, the episode became Lost Trails, most downloaded story. Journalists resurfaced the case. Reddit threads exploded. But more importantly, it brought something else. Volunteers, hikers, survivalists, people who knew the terrain, people who believed there was still something left to find. The world had moved on, but now it was circling back. And for the first time in nearly a decade, the silence that had followed Mark and Luke into the wild began to crack. It started as a comment, buried in a long Reddit thread beneath a repost of Rachel's interview. "I don't think they're dead," someone wrote. "I think they survived. Maybe even chose not to come back." At first, people dismissed it. just another conspiracy. But then more voices joined in, people who understood survival, former search and rescue volunteers, off-grid enthusiasts. They broke it down, the gear Mark packed, the terrain, the timing. If they were caught in a storm, they wouldn't have climbed. They'd have gone down, toward shelter, toward rivers, toward tree cover. And if they had food, fire, and enough knowledge, even minimal shelter, survival wasn't impossible. Unlikely, but not impossible. Especially for two people with calm temperaments, experience outdoors, and a father willing to sacrifice everything to protect his son. That theory grew roots. Podcasts picked it up. YouTube creators built maps and digital reconstructions. The Wrangell Survival Hypothesis, one documentary called it. Could Mark and Luke have found a cave, a ravine, built a structure from pine and tarp? What if Luke had gotten hurt and Mark chose to stay behind? What if they weren't waiting for rescue, but had stopped believing anyone was coming? Some took it further, said they had crossed into Yukon territory, started over, changed names, chose the silence over the circus. Most people scoffed at that part, but the idea of survival, of a father keeping his son alive in Alaska's unforgiving wild, that stuck. Even Rachel didn't dismiss it outright. Not anymore. If anyone could have figured it out, she said in a follow-up interview, it was Mark. And deep down, part of her wanted it to be true, because survival meant hope. And hope, however fragile, meant they were still out there, still together, still fighting. The wilderness had taken them. But what if it hadn't won? He was 71 years old, lean as driftwood, with a voice like gravel, and eyes that had seen too much. His name was Walt Ridley, a former backcountry ranger with over 3 decades of experience in Wrangell, St. Elias. He heard Rachel on the radio, heard her voice crack when she spoke about Mark, and something shifted. He called Jonah. "There's something you need to know," he said. "I didn't put it in any report because I never had proof. But I swear there's a cabin out there. According to Walt, it wasn't on any map, not government-issued, not even USGS. A trapper's shelter built decades ago by someone who lived off the grid, then disappeared. Walt had stumbled across it once in the late 80s after getting pushed off his usual route by rising water. It was tucked into a gully north of Roan Ridge, half collapsed and swallowed by alder and spruce. But it was real. A wood stove, a rusted kettle, animal skins nailed to the walls. He'd meant to mark the location, but his compass had glitched that day. Something about magnetic interference in the valley. He never found it again, not for lack of trying. "I've looked for it every season since," he told Jonah. "Sometimes I think the land moves things, or maybe I dreamed it. But it felt real." When Jonah asked if it could be where Mark and Luke ended up, Walt didn't hesitate. If they were smart, if they had gear, and it sounds like they did, they'd have gone down low. Toward water, toward shelter. That cabin could have saved them. The problem was, no one else had ever seen it. Not rangers, not hikers, not even satellite images turned up anything. But Walt swore it was there. And suddenly the map Mark left behind, the red circle deep in unmapped terrain, didn't look random anymore. It looked like a destination, a place someone meant to find. Rachel stared at the circled area again, her fingers hovering over it like a pulse. "If that cabin exists," she whispered, "that's where he would have taken Luke. Not to die, but to live, away from the noise, away from the search, somewhere the world would never think to look." In August 2024, 10 years after Mark and Luke Jensen vanished, 2 hikers made camp along the eastern edge of Wrangell, St. Elias. Their names weren't important at first. Just a pair of seasoned mountaineers, one from Washington, one from British Columbia, retracing forgotten routes, logging wildlife, and chasing the kind of silence only the Alaskan backcountry can offer. They weren't looking for a mystery. They didn't even know they were walking into one. On the 4th day, a storm rolled in early. The forecast had said light rain. It turned into sleet. Freezing fog dropped like a curtain. GPS units froze. Trail markers vanished. The hikers made a snap decision. Veer west, descend through a gully, find shelter. By dawn, the storm had passed. But they weren't where they were supposed to be. The terrain was steeper, heavier, wilder. No cairns, no boot tracks. No signs of human passage at all. It was the kind of place most people never reach, not because it's off limits, but because it's invisible. A pocket of land pressed between ridges and shadow. As they climbed out of the ravine, one of them spotted something strange through the brush. At first it looked like an old tarp snagged on a spruce limb. Then they got closer. It wasn't tarp, it was canvas, sun-bleached, shredded at the edges, and moving faintly in the breeze. One hiker called out, the other drew closer. What they found stopped them cold. This was no debris, no lost gear or discarded shelter. This was something else, something that didn't belong in the present, something that had been waiting a very long time to be found. The canvas had once been part of a lean-to, a makeshift shelter built low to the ground and nestled between fallen logs and mossy stone. Half of it had collapsed under snow and time. The rest was held together by pine branches and rusted nails. Scattered inside were the remains of a campsite, a broken lantern, a melted tin mug, a fishing lure, and beneath it all, partially covered by soil and leaves, bones, human, weathered, long exposed to the elements. The hikers didn't touch anything. They backed away. One radioed the ranger station at McCarthy. GPS coordinates were dropped. Authorities were dispatched. By nightfall, the site had been flagged as a probable human remains recovery, and by morning, investigators confirmed what many had feared and few had dared to hope. It was them. Or at least, it looked like it. Two sets of remains, one larger, one smaller. A rusted-out .308 hunting rifle leaned against a tree. Nearby, in a cracked plastic bag tucked under a flat stone, was a journal, still intact. The pages curled and water-stained, but legible. It was written in ballpoint pen, the handwriting tight and neat. On the inside cover, a name was written, Mark Jensen. The site was cordoned off, photos taken, samples collected, but already word was spreading. A decade of silence was ending. The long-lost voices of a father and son had finally broken through the wild. But the journal, and the final pages within it, would reveal that what happened in those woods wasn't just survival. It was something deeper, something slower. A quiet, desperate unraveling. And now, finally, the world would begin to understand. The notebook was soft and swollen with age, its spine warped, the cover faded almost gray. The first few pages were stuck together with moisture, but the writing, once uncovered, was unmistakably Mark's. Tight lines, careful punctuation. His voice was on every page. Not as he was in life, measured, methodical, but unraveling in real time. The first entries were hopeful, focused. July 14th. Lost the trail mid-afternoon, thick fog. Luke doing okay. We're circling back to find our bearings. No panic, just need a break in weather. Then came logistics, inventory of supplies, water sources noted, temperature drops recorded. Like he was keeping track for a rescue team that would arrive any day. But the entries soon shifted, became shorter, frantic. July 16th. Still no trail. River isn't where it should be. Luke tired, trying not to let him see. I'm scared. There were stretches with no writing. Blank days marked only by a line or two. Then paragraphs would return, longer and more erratic. He switched pens midway through, black to blue, as if the change could help him stay in control. July 18th. Burned through second flare. No response. Starting to think we're too far south, or west. Hard to tell. Every ridge looks the same. One page was smudged by something that might have been rain, or sweat, or tears. July 19th. Luke won't eat much, says he's not hungry, trying to keep spirits up. Told him it's just like camping, just longer. The tone changed again near the end. Acceptance crept in, not with drama, but resignation. I think I led us wrong. I think we walked past safety. I don't know how to fix it. The last entry was the hardest to read, not because the ink had faded, but because it hadn't. It was clear, simple, direct. Just 5 words, scrawled in uneven lines. Tell Rachel I tried everything. Then silence. No date. No goodbye. Just the weight of a man who loved his family and couldn't find his way back. The entries confirmed what many had guessed. It wasn't one decision that doomed them. It was a series of small ones. Logical at the time, fatal in hindsight. It started on the second day. They were supposed to loop around the base of Mount Drum, skirt the river, and return to the trailhead by Sunday morning. But fog rolled in early, and the terrain became unrecognizable. Mark wrote that the map didn't match the land anymore. Drainages had shifted. Animal trails looked like hiking paths. The sky was a featureless gray. No sun to navigate by. They thought they were heading north. They weren't. By the time they realized, it was too late. The slope they descended was too steep to climb back. The ground below turned marshy, then dry again, then into dense forest. No landmarks, no signage. Mark's notes reflected the shift. Luke says he remembers this rock. I don't. I'm trying not to show doubt. They tried to backtrack, but each attempt led them deeper into the trees. Food rations were cut in half. Fishing gear helped, but the streams weren't consistent. One day they had plenty. The next, nothing but stagnant pools and mosquito swarms. Mark tried to reach high ground multiple times, hoping to spot something, a trail, a tower, a roof. But the peaks were too far, and Luke was too tired to keep climbing. I should have waited for clearer skies, Mark wrote. I should have trusted my gut. I should have signed the dam registry. On day 5, they built the shelter. The canvas came from their emergency tarp. Mark reinforced it with branches. He taught Luke how to tie knots, how to ration firewood, how to stay calm. For a while it helped. They read from a worn paperback, made up stories, pretended it was an adventure. But the entries said what the voices never did. Mark was unraveling. The compass was useless. The PLB never activated. Either it failed or he never used it. No one would ever know why. What mattered was this. They didn't choose to disappear. They tried to come home. But the forest had other plans. And once they were off trail, the wild made sure they stayed that way. The entry that changed everything was dated July 21st. The handwriting was shaky, less precise. A man losing strength and certainty. We're not where I thought we were. 7 words. Not a scream, not a breakdown, just a quiet surrender. Mark had still been hoping, up until then. Hoping he'd made a navigational mistake that could be corrected. Hoping the river would lead them back to civilization. Hoping someone was coming. But by the 4th week, hope was running out faster than food. The next pages were sparse, not because he stopped writing, but because there wasn't much left to say. The cold had crept in. Nights dipped below freezing. Mark made notes about batteries, the flashlight, the spare headlamp. Down to 1 bar, he wrote, trying to save it for nighttime. He stopped mentioning fish, stopped mentioning fire. Luke, once described as quiet but okay, had grown weaker, coughing a lot today. Skin cold. I keep telling him stories. I don't think he's really listening anymore. Then this, scrawled like an afterthought. He asked if we were going to die. Mark didn't write his answer. By now the journal entries had become survival math. Calories, temperatures, miles. But between the numbers were flashes of emotion. I keep thinking about our last dinner, he wrote. He wanted pancakes. I said no, said we didn't have time. I should have made the damn pancakes. The final complete entry came just after that. If I don't come back, tell Rachel it wasn't her fault. None of this was her fault. After that, there was only one more page, blank, except for the words at the top. "I'm going out in the morning." He signed it, not Mark. "Dad." Mark Jensen left the shelter at first light. He packed light, a half-empty water bottle, the rusted hunting rifle, and a scrap of trail mix sealed in a torn Ziploc. He left the journal beneath Luke's blanket. The note was written on the back of an old receipt. "Stay warm. I'll be back before dark." He never returned. Luke's body was found inside the shelter, still tucked under the tarp, his remains undisturbed, like he had obeyed his father's final request with the last of his strength. The bones were curled inward, arms wrapped around his chest. Peaceful, still. Marks were discovered half a mile away, near the edge of a ravine. Pine needles covered most of the site, but investigators noted signs of a fall, a broken femur, fractured ribs. They believe he slipped trying to cross wet rock, maybe scouting for elevation, maybe chasing the glimmer of a clearing. There was no sign of a struggle, no wildlife interference. The rifle lay beside him, untouched. His backpack had been dropped several feet uphill, as if he'd tried to crawl. And then he stopped. The area was just outside the original search perimeter, less than 2 hours' hike from the red circle on his map. He had almost made it. Almost. What hurt the most, Rachel later said, was how ordinary it all was. No grand mystery, no conspiracy. Just 1,000 small moments where things could have gone differently. A missed sign, a wrong turn, a fog too thick to see through. But what stayed with her more than the tragedy, more than the crushing weight of the truth, was this. Mark didn't stop trying. Even when the cold took his balance, even when the forest stripped him of direction, even when the world had given up, he hadn't. He hunted not for food but for a way out. He died looking for the one path that might have saved his son. And in that final effort, in that crawl through brush and frostbite, he had given everything he had left, not for himself, but for Luke, the father who never stopped fighting, the son who waited, believing he'd return. When investigators opened the last pages of the journal, they found new handwriting, smaller, less steady. The loops were loose, the lines uneven. At first, they thought it might have been damaged by time, but it wasn't. It was Luke. Mark's entries had ended, but the boy had kept writing. Not every day, not much, just scattered thoughts, a line here, a sentence there. Some were barely legible, the ink faded, the hand too cold, but the words were unmistakably his. Dad said he'd be back before dark. "I heard something last night, but I was too scared to go out. I'm hungry, but I'm trying not to think about it." There were drawings, too, simple ones, a pine tree, a fish, a stick figure beside a fire, maybe memories, maybe hope. He had stayed inside the shelter, like he was told. He'd tried to keep warm. One page said simply, "It's snowing." Another, written in a slanted scrawl, repeated the same phrase 3 times, like a whisper, echoing in an empty room. "Please come back. Please come back. Please come back." But the line that stayed with investigators, the one Rachel later read out loud in a taped interview, came near the end. The ink was light, the words spaced unevenly, the writing of a boy trying to stay strong even as his body weakened. "I hope someone finds us." No panic, no anger, just hope. The last page was blank, except for one small word written in the corner. Mom." Nothing else. Not a goodbye, not a cry for help, just a name. The most human thing in a place so devoid of humanity. Luke had waited as long as he could. He wrote until the cold took his fingers, until the hunger blurred his thoughts, until the silence became too heavy to write through. But even as his world narrowed, he believed in something, someone, that maybe someday someone would come. And after 10 long years, someone did. The final detail that made sense of it all was also the cruelest. The storm. Records confirmed it, an early-season whiteout that hit the Wrangell backcountry just 5 days after Mark's last journal entry. Over a foot of snow fell in less than 12 hours. Winds howled over 60 miles per hour. Visibility dropped to 0. It was the same kind of freak weather that had disoriented them at the start, only this time it buried them. The lean-to was shallow, low to the ground, designed to hide to shield from wind and animals. But in snow, that design became a trap. It collapsed inward under the weight. Branches broke, canvas snapped. What had been a fragile refuge became invisible from above, indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain. Helicopters flew over the area twice during the original 2014 search. Both flights recorded no visual anomalies. The shelter was there the entire time, but it had vanished into white, covered by snow, hidden by time, and so the land kept its secret. Seasons passed, snow melted and returned, trees grew, the brush thickened, nature smoothed the contours, blending the site into the fold of the earth like a scar that had long since healed. And with it, Mark and Luke became ghosts. Not by legend, but by landscape. It wasn't malice. It wasn't some unsolvable riddle. It was indifference, a vast, wild world that doesn't bend for loss. Rachel later stood at the site. She didn't speak at first, just listened. To the trees, to the wind, to the place where her family had vanished, and waited and slept. She said it felt peaceful, quiet, not cruel. Like the wild had tried in its own way to protect them. And for 10 years it had. Buried in snow, wrapped in silence, waiting to be found. 10 years, 1 month, and 18 days after Mark and Luke Jensen vanished, Rachel stood at the place where their story ended. She arrived by helicopter. The flight crew said nothing as they circled once, then hovered above the clearing. A ranger helped her down. She moved slowly, wrapped in a borrowed parka, hair pinned back tight, face unreadable. Not because she was trying to be strong, but because there were no words for this kind of moment. The shelter was still there, partially reconstructed by investigators for forensic mapping. The canvas had been carefully folded, the soil beneath marked and studied, but the site had been left as intact as possible, out of respect, out of grief. Rachel didn't ask questions. She didn't take photos. She just walked the perimeter, like she was reading the land with her feet, measuring the space between the fire ring, the broken branches, the stone where Mark had once rested his pack. Then she knelt. She pulled something small from her coat pocket. Luke's childhood compass, blue plastic, scratched and dulled from years of backyard adventures, trail walks, and rainy-day treasure hunts. She placed it gently at the edge of the shelter. No speech, no ceremony. Just a gift left in the place where he had waited, where his father had fought, where time had finally painfully given them back. When she stood again, her breath caught, but she didn't cry. Instead, she whispered something only the wind could hear, then turned, stepped back toward the chopper, and flew away. But in her wake, the silence felt different. Not empty, not unfinished, just still. The story spread again, but not like before. Not with wild speculation or twisted theories. This time, the tone was different, respectful, grateful, wounded. Podcasts updated their episodes. News outlets ran follow-ups. Jonah Wells released a new installment of Lost Trails, simply titled Found. It included Rachel's final interview, audio from the crash site, quotes from the journal, read by voice actors. It ended with her words, "They were never lost to me, just unseen." The episode went viral again, but now it wasn't because people were obsessed with the mystery. It was because the story had become something else, something deeper, a reflection. Communities across Alaska held memorials. A bronze plaque was installed at the McCarthy Ranger Station. Hikers shared the Jensen story as a cautionary tale and a lesson in devotion. People wrote letters, not to Rachel, but to their own parents, their own children. Because in Mark's words, in Luke's final hopes, people saw their own fragility, their own capacity to endure. And for Rachel, that was enough. They were found. They were remembered. And she would carry them forward, not as a headline, not as a tragedy, but as what they had always been, a father and son, brave, bound together, and never, not for one moment, truly gone. When the full account was finally pieced together, journal entries, GPS data, forensic reports, Experts began weighing in. Survival instructors, SAR veterans, wilderness psychologists, not to judge, but to understand. Because this wasn't just a tragedy. It was a study in what happens when everything goes slightly, terribly wrong. Mark's biggest mistake, they said, wasn't recklessness. It was confidence, a belief, earned through experience, that he could figure it out. He read the land the way he always had, but that land had changed. Trails eroded, rivers shifted. Fog made familiar features feel foreign. What killed them wasn't one bad decision. It was the accumulation of uncertainty, fear, and fatigue, all magnified by terrain that doesn't give second chances. And perhaps the cruelest irony of all, Mark died less than a mile from an old, decommissioned ranger tower. Still standing, still stocked with emergency rations, a place that could have saved them. He never saw it. Trees blocked the sightline, elevation masked the trail. He was so close, so painfully close, yet the wild gave him no hint, just more silence, just more of the same. Experts called it the paradox of the lost. The more you try to find your way back, the further you often go. One instructor said he did everything right, except survive. And sometimes, out here, that's just not enough. Still, the case is now used in training seminars, in university lectures. Not as a failure, but as a reminder. The wilderness doesn't owe you safety, not even if you respect it, not even if you're careful. But it also gave the Jensens a strange mercy. It kept them together, it kept them whole, it kept them waiting, for 10 years, to be brought home. The final scene is simple. A quiet room, soft light, a single microphone. Rachel sits at a table, the journal open in front of her. Her hands shake slightly, but her voice does not. She reads the last entry, written in a child's fading script, words slanted and uneven across the bottom of a weathered page. "Tell Mom I love her." She pauses. No music, no voiceover, just her breath catching, just the sound of the page turning, slow and deliberate. Then we cut to a wide shot, overhead, silent. The Alaskan wilderness stretches beneath a pale sky, jagged peaks, endless forest, rivers cutting like veins through the earth. There are no answers in the shot, no final revelation, just the land, as beautiful as it is brutal, as giving as it is cruel. We linger there, long enough to feel it, not for closure, but for memory. Because in the end, the story isn't about what was lost. It's about what was found. A compass placed gently at the edge of a shelter. A father's final promise. A boy's last words carried home by wind and time. And a love that refused, through silence, through snow, through 10 unforgiving years, to ever be forgotten. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.